Can we check that all connections are working?
Peter, mine's is fine, thank you.
Thank you, Margot. Shall we roll call? Jim?
Yes, fine,
Jim's
thanks.
fine. Fraser, are you wanting to take over at this point? Joe, you're on mute.
Hiya. I'm happy to help if anyone needs anything, but I'm not sure who should be involved in the meeting or not.
Okay, the protocol has asked the provost to do this. Pauline, how are you doing? You're on mute. Diane? Kelly?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, that's good. Derek, hello, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
You can hear me now, yeah?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Joe. Elizabeth, hello. Elizabeth's probably on mute. Thank you for attending. Debbie?
Here, Provost.
Good. Okay, and let's go through Andrew Hardy.
Oh, everything's ship shape in Bristol, fashion, Provost.
Let's stay off that subject. Kath Johnston.
Yes, I'm fine.
Colin Cassidy.
Fine.
And Diane, you've already said. Okay. I'm scrolling through. We have 35 people involved in this meeting, and you can see 9 at a time. You can't see the officers, but they are there in the background. So anyone struggling with the Teams and only able to do audio?
Yeah, Peter, Kenneth Baird can only do audio.
Okay. But he is he actually in the meeting? Is not showing up on my screen.
Yeah, he's down on mine anyway. He's down on the bottom with the circle KB.
Okay, as KB. Thank you for that. Okay, since all the connections appear in order, it's my opportunity to welcome you all to the first virtual meeting of Midlothian Council. We have a text that's been drawn up by Democratic Services, and here it is. A copy of the virtual meeting protocol was circulated with the agenda. I'd like to draw your attention to the following. Members are aware that similar to when meetings are held in the council chamber, they should mute their microphones and only activate them when invited to speak. Once you finish speaking, please remember once again to mute your microphone. Members who wish to speak should do so by using the raise hand option and lower your hand once you have spoken. With regard to some of the reports on the agenda, it will be necessary to ask members to vote. Votes will be taken by way of a roll call. The minute will not include the roll call vote unless a member has been successful in moving a roll call vote in terms of the standing orders. Public part of the meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording may be uploaded to the council's website. Should the meeting last more than 2 hours, it's my intention to break around the 2-hour mark for 15 minutes, and if necessary, repeat this again after another 2 hours. Some of you will be aware that another council's first virtual meeting took 6.5 hours. We're obviously trying to avoid that. A number of the items are marked purely for noting, but there are also a number of those which we could vote on, which it may not be necessary to vote on. If that's the case, then anyone who wishes a vote is entitled to ask me to call one. But if I sense the meeting is in agreement with the officers' recommendations, there may not be a vote in order to expedite the meeting. I'll remind you that it's been expected that we've all read the papers and that we've questioned the officers, and that only exceptionally will the officers be speaking to the papers. However, at this time, there are some very important ones where you will be hearing from the officers. First of all, Grace, along with Kevin and Fiona, will be talking to the route map, which is item 8.1. Gary will be talking to the financial papers 8.7 and 8.10. And Fiona will also be contributing later on in the private section to the consideration of education matters. I now move on to apologies. We have apologies from Russell Imrie and from Vic Bourne. Are there any other apologies? Order of business. There is one additional item which I propose we take straight away. Some of you will be aware that former Labour councillor Bob Jenkin died last week, and I would like to therefore alter the order of business so that we can hear a tribute to him from Margot Russell and from John Hackett, and then observe a minute of respectful silence, recognising his contribution to Midlothian Council over the years. Margot, can I ask you to speak to us?
Thank you, Provost. The time during this crisis, it's sad that we've lost someone who was very well known and well thought of in his community. I knew Bob from 2003 to 2007, and he was the councillor from Mayfield South, I think it was. He was also a cabinet member at that time for community services, which obviously took in leisure. I found him to be very diligent in his work with his community. And as I say, still now that he's not been a councillor for still a long time, he's still, as I say, well thought of. Obviously my condolences will be already sent to his wife Gail and his daughter, and obviously all the other family members who at this time must be grieving quite a lot. And I know that the community council in that area will also take the time to mention him in their own excuse me, in their own deliberations. So thank you, Provost, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about a very good councillor, hard-working councillor, and sadly passed away and left us with a legacy. Thank you.
May I interrupt
John
for a
Hackett.
moment? Sorry, Provost. I've let on the meeting chat everyone know that Joe Wallace has been cut off, but there's not been any response yet.
Thank you. The protocol is we pause the meeting to see if the connection can be restored.
We'll just get in contact with him, Provost.
Thank you.
Hi, Provost. I'm just letting you know that I'm back in again.
True. Thank you very much indeed. Margaret, thank you very much for your contribution. John Hackett, I think, was able to say a few more words about Bob Jenkins.
Thank you, Provost. I just wanted to say my sincere thanks to Bob for his service to the people of Mayfield in his period as a councillor. He was an active trade unionist. He was very passionate about his community, and he was loved his family dearly. I know he'll be missed. I didn't know Bob that well, but his name gets mentioned all the time when I'm out and about in Mayfield. So, as I say, he'll be sorely missed, and my condolences to his family and the wider community. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Can I suggest we now have a minute's silence remembering Bob Jenkins and his service to the Mayfield and South Midlothian. Thank you all. We now resume the normal business of the council. Declarations of interest, there being none. Deputations, there being none. The minutes, has anyone any points to raise on the minutes? I take it then that the minutes are as read. Thank you, no hands up. We pass to questions to the council leader. There being none. We now move to motions. Motion is item 7 on page 6. Could Councillor Johnson like to speak to this motion?
Thank you very much, Provost. I believe the motion actually speaks for itself, and it is with a heartfelt thanks that I and my fellow councillors are all grateful to everyone who's helped to keep Midlothian going. Existing and new charities and organisations have been supported by our council officers to promote these organisations to excel for everyone's benefit by making resources available, providing advice and assisting with grant applications and much more. I didn't want to mention any particular organisation because I didn't want to miss anyone out, but it is with my heartfelt thanks that I'm so chuffed that Midlothian residents have stepped up and excelled wonderfully to help our community. And I hope everyone can support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, I'll just echo exactly what Cass says. There are far too many people out there who we owe a great deal to. Whilst we've been asked to stay home and stay safe, they've had to go out there to continue to deliver services, and the wide range of people who are out there, the unseen many that aren't on the front line, that aren't talked about every day, and their frontline staff have just done a fantastic job, and I'd just like to pass on my sincerest thanks and to them all for their hard work.
Yes, I'm much in line with this motion. I think it's amazing to see the flexibility that our staff have demonstrated. I know we had the word pandemic in our risk register, but none of us could have predicted exactly how this would pan out. So congratulations to all who really discovered themselves in new ways of working, flexibility and sensitivity to human needs at this very difficult time. This is a motion that was agreed by all the leaders, so I think it's not necessary to have a vote. I would like to record that all councillors are very much in agreement with it. We now move on to 8.1, which is at page 7 of 378. This is the very important route map, and I'm going to ask Grace to address this paper with contributions also from Kevin and Fiona. Grace.
Thank you, Provost. And before I begin, may I also please thank our staff, our partners and communities for their heroic response during the COVID-19 emergency phase. As you know, though, we've now moved out of the initial emergency phase into phase 1, and today I'm pleased to present the Midlothian Route Map, which seeks to both support recovery at the same time as retaining the best elements of transformation which took place in response to the pandemic itself, making these changes permanent to the way the Council delivers its services in order that we can build back better. Our route map is based on one overarching principle, that in delivering services, whether they are commissioned internally or externally, that we keep our communities, our employees and our environment safe, minimising exposure to COVID-19 or any other viruses, at the same time as meeting our commitment to being carbon neutral by 2030. Building on our 9 drivers for change, this strategy covers the following areas. Economic renewal, and this ambitious strategy is included today in Report 8.2. The Accelerated Capital Programme, the Education Recovery Plan, of which there is further detail in the Finance Report 8.10 and the Education Report in 9.1 on today's agenda, our hub and spoke place service delivery, health and social care, digital by default, remote working and carbon neutral by 2030 approaches to the workplace, including active travel. Please note, however, that the recovery phases are fluid and the recovery reports being considered today are only as up to date at the time of writing and are subject to change. Many of the phases have been difficult to plan for within the limited resources available, and also the fact that the situation can change significantly in line with public health advice or Scottish Government advice, which we may receive moving through each of the phases. Midlothian is also the fastest growing local authority, which brings both unique challenges and also opportunities at this time. And some of the recovery plans in particular, for example, the Education Recovery Plan, may be subject to considerable change indeed. Therefore, I would now like to hand over to Fiona Robertson, Executive Director, Children and Young People, and then to Kevin Anderson, Executive Director, Place, to outline some of the key messages from each of their directorates in relation to the Midlothian Route Map through and out of the crisis.
Good morning, Provost. As indicated by the Chief Executive, our Education Restart Plan continues to evolve to reflect the statutory duties placed on education authorities, as set out in the Education Continuity Directions from the Scottish Government, given on the 21st of May, 10th of June, with another direction due on the 1st of July. These directions provide us with a legal basis on which we can start the planning of the reopening of our schools as set out in the route map. And this is also informed by a number of guidance documents published by the Scottish Government, the most recent of which was published yesterday in relation to reopening early learning and childcare settings. And we anticipate further guidance within the next few days. So the Education Restart Plan set out in the route map is fully informed by all of the guidance agreed jointly between COSLA and the Scottish Government. Throughout the lockdown period, we've worked closely with other service areas and partners to support our most vulnerable children, the viability and sustainability of some of our key partners, such as early years providers, and expanded the number of children and young people in receipt of a free school meal. Within phase 1 in our restart plan, our staff will continue to provide critical childcare for key workers and essential support for our more vulnerable children and families, whilst planning for the August return. An Education Restart strategic group is in place to support our planning and readiness for the reopening of schools in August. And to date, we have taken forward almost all of the actions set out in phase 1 of our restart plan, and our 4-phase plan is at an advanced stage and ready to be submitted to Education Scotland for scrutiny next week. However, we have many challenges ahead of us, not least of which will be assessing and responding to the impact of the pandemic on our staff, children and families, but also the practical and financial challenges which are significant and may, for example, impact on our ability to provide critical childcare and support for vulnerable children over the summer period, given the additional funding required to do so. Reopening schools in August has practical challenges in terms of the additional staffing required, both teaching and non-teaching, to comply with the public health guidance on social distancing and infection control, and to address the attainment gap that has potentially widened during the lockdown period. We will again continue to prioritise the critical childcare. We will require additional transport given the physical distance measures in place, and the capacity of our school buildings, which vary significantly from school to school. And whilst we aspire to have 50% of our pupils in school, to do so will require leasing community spaces. So all of the above comes with additional costs or a loss of income to the council, which are yet to be fully quantified given the scale and the pace of this work. But in conclusion, we are well placed to deliver the education restart plan, but continue to face practical and financial challenges to do so.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Just a reference in terms of place, clearly with the delivery of statutory and critical services, we've delivered those differently during the lockdown period. And now in phase one, most of the measures outlined in the route map are in place. We're taking a positive and flexible approach to build momentum around the new supply and recovery. And that's reflected in the range of reports that are in the agenda today across economic renewal, the capital investment and our strategic sites. The Midlothian branding to locate in Midlothian will assist businesses to adapt and develop and grow, with opportunities for the local workforce to train and progress. In the accelerated capital programme, we've progressed a review across housing, education and our strategic sites such as Shawfair and Hill End for opportunities or direct purchases to meet recovery objectives and support the economic activity. The placemaking in localities will support employment, new housing connected to community facilities and public transport, and establish communities to benefit from the growth and the development of the green network and leisure and recreation. Thank you, Provost.
Peter, you're muted.
Thank you, Jim. As Grace mentioned earlier on, we will be discussing some of the educational measures later on in the meeting. And also you'll be aware that many items here have been discussed by the leaders group and also in the education committee. Are there any further comments on the route map? Derek.
Thanks, Provost. I think, as you say, this has been discussed at the leaders meeting, and hopefully it's something that we can agree on unanimously. I was really glad to hear Grace outlining the key principle in the planning for the new normal, because there is a new normal and we really need to ensure that we can deliver the services that we're tasked to do so. And the reality is whether commissioned internally or externally, we need to minimise movement of people, materials that are required to deliver any of our services. And this minimises exposure to any virus that comes along and also moves us on in our climate change agenda. And that has to be embedded right across everything that we're doing. We need to minimise the movement of people. We need to minimise the movement of stuff. And that translated means we need to make sure that stuff's all available where possible at hand. And I know there are other areas we need to be clear in there. As Grace also spelled out, this is really fluent. And like one of the points that Fiona makes about education is the additional transport. People aren't sure whether that additional transport will be there when we go to reopen. People aren't sure that the transport that we had will be there because we're not sure what companies will survive this. So this is going to have to be fluent, and we're going to have to continue to look at different ways of doing things. One of the things that is certain in all of this is the cost of this is going to be massive to local government, massive to the Scottish Government, and very very costly to the Westminster government. And there needs to be co-working together to understand the problems that each of the groupings have. And we need to make sure that when we're taking decisions that we are working together to make sure that that's either funded or we can identify where that funding is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Are there further comments and contributions? There being none, I propose that unless anyone would like a roll call vote on this, that we accept it as approved by the Council and move on to the next item, 8.2. I don't see any hands up, therefore approved by the Council. You're happy with that, Verona and Alan? Verona and Alan, do you hear me?
Yes, yes, Provost.
Fine, just establishing the precedent. We move on to 8.2. Are there any comments on the approval of this economic renewal strategy? Are we happy for this paper? Is there anyone wanting a vote on it? There being none, the item 8.2 is approved.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think me and
Thank
Derek
you.
both had our hands up.
had their hands up.
Ellie, I apologise. You didn't hear him instantly on the screen. Here we are.
Thanks, Provost. I mean, this is really just a comment rather than a question, and you'll hear from the background noise of my daughter chattering why I'm asking it. But I really think that in terms of our economic renewal, we really need to be linking this together with our childcare strategy and reopening of schools, because I think what we've seen today is the FSB, for example, coming out and saying that we really need to make sure that we look at this through a gendered lens, and that we understand that until we get kids back to school and back to nursery, our economic renewal on a local or national level doesn't stand a chance. So I want to make sure that we have that as a priority, and appreciate that actually this links into a lot of the other papers, but it's really important that we get kids back to school and back to nursery as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I quite see your point. Any further hands up?
Provost.
Kelly?
No, Kelly's up the top, I'm doing the bottom.
I know, there you are. Okay, gotcha. Speak
I'm
now.
hoping I didn't even sound like Kelly, I'm hoping. But it was good to hear the heckler at the back, Kelly, when she was speaking. It puts a human face on these meetings. I wholeheartedly agree with Kelly. One of the big challenges we're going to have here is ensuring that there is either school or child care for people, and especially single parents, that will have a huge impact on them, on whether they can get back to work and and full time. So I think we need to make sure that we do that. I think, again, I want to make sure that the key principle that we're embedding in this is about making sure that when we're commissioning services internally or externally, that we need to minimise movement of people and materials. So the more local we can get it, the better. And I understand there are procurement rules and regulations, but we need to also work with local companies to make sure that they understand how they can look to procure stuff, how we can work in partnership. It is absolutely imperative for us that in our economic recovery, we make sure that it starts in Midlothian, and the benefits of that stay within the wider Lothian region and work with our partners across councils. And I would just like to ask if we could maybe have a statement for officers and what they intend to do to make sure that local companies get the support they need to be able to come in and look for assistance and being able to move their companies in whichever way they need to meet that new normal, for wanting a better word.
Councillor Milligan, are you after a paper there, perhaps to go to the leaders group and then to the council in August?
I would have hoped that there would be an officer that would be here in attendance, either Derek Oliver or Kevin Anderson, that could answer that.
Kevin, are you able to comment on our support for local businesses in Midlothian at this time?
Provost, I am, but I'll pass it on to Derek Oliver, because he's actually done the extensive work in preparing and developing this paper, and he's also in attendance.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Provost, and thank you, Derek, for the invitation to speak. In terms of attracting businesses to the area, we are adopting a very flexible approach to our land allocation and planning, and that's to encourage businesses to diversify and adapt, and also encourage people to come in to Midlothian. In terms of the procurement aspect, I'm pleased to say that we are drafting a strategy with regards to SMEs, the small medium enterprise strategy. It's currently in draft form, and this is intended to support the business aims to achieve a mixed economy of suppliers, to support and develop our local market, and to maximise opportunities for these suppliers to participate in local government procurement exercise. So that's already in motion, and I'll be pleased to bring that forward as soon as possible.
Thank you. I think that covers the point. There being no other hands up, can I take it that 8.2 is adopted by the Council? Nobody requires a vote, and we move on therefore to 8.3, which is the Community Planning Partnership Plan 2021, also heavily caveated with the somewhat unknowable consequences of the current situation. Is there anyone wanting to comment on 8.3? Midlothian, a great place to grow. Still. Jim. Jim,
yes, Provost. Yep. Thanks for that, Provost. I mean, obviously, when this plan was developed and accepted and discussed at our last meeting, we were basically in a different world. We had gone through a lot of consultation across our partnerships and with our communities to develop this plan. But what we're publishing here is still a relevant document. However, it obviously needs to be updated to reflect the current and certainly the short to medium term realities that are going to exist. In the original plan, we had actually added one other top priority, and that was to address the climate change emergency. And it's vital to include that aspect of our priorities when we're looking to amend the plan, as we're going to need to do, to reflect the new normal, which has to include, as Derek has already said, the minimising travel and the localisation of our service provision, which assists us to deal with the spread of the COVID emergency and any other virus that might affect us, and also minimises the activities that contribute to climate change. So you know, I would hope that we would be prepared to adopt this this report and to agree the recommendations. Provost, thank you.
Further comments, Diane Alexander. Diane, Councillor Alexander. Diane, I think you're muted.
Referring to transport and our way through Midlothian, transport links, etc., through Midlothian, given that we're getting some money from the Scottish Government to help with green sort of routes through Midlothian, I think we also need to look at how people can use both public transport and their own transport, such as bicycles, etc. So I think that we need to set up points where we can leave our bicycles or pick up our bicycles and use public transport, and also make it safer for people to walk and cycle through Midlothian. If you use the cycle routes just now and you're a walker or you're a casual cyclist, it's actually quite dangerous because of speeding cyclists. And I think we also need to improve the cycling on roads, so make markers down roads that so that people can actually cycle down them. So I think this needs to be part of our green and travel strategy. I was also thinking that we could have hubs for young people where they might experiment with entrepreneurship. And I think that this is quite important going forward, given that a lot of pupils will be leaving school with perhaps nowhere to go. So I think that this sort of new entrepreneurship is also important for going forward in Midlothian.
Thank you for that contribution. Certainly the council is looking at cycle activity between Dalkeith and Pathhead, and I know there are other initiatives. Jim, would you like to come back on that? And then Colin.
I mean, I think, to be honest with you, there are a lot of things that we'll need to develop as we move forward, including the kind of things that that Diane's suggestion. But this situation is likely to be quite fast changing, and it will require us to be able to adapt as quickly as we can to the changing circumstances. And I think that, you know, we've already done a lot of consultation on the original plan. But in moving forward, I think we need to engage as much as we can in the fast changing circumstances, our partners in particular, and also our communities as much as we can, and get the kind of feedback that Diane's referring to when she's talking about the issues with transportation and you're using your own power to get about our county.
Thank you. Can I now hear from Colin and then John Hackett, I think?
Thank you,
Colin.
Thank you. Following on Jim and Diane's points there about cycle routes, we've just had a major fail this morning. As we're talking, I've just been contacted by a cycle group in Dalkeith who have put in a few suggestions, and every one of them have been knocked back by the council for temporary infrastructure are not feasible due to legal constraints or temporary measures. Now, this is causing a lot of angst amongst constituents who have been enjoying the roadways during the lockdown, but are now being told you can't use these routes anymore, or we're not going to make them safe for you to use anymore. So this is an example of how we need to be engaging with our communities in a better way. If we've got this policy, we've got to stand by it and not just be lip service to it here. I want action here, and I'm not happy with what I'm reading.
Thank you. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I know this agenda item's the single Midlothian plan, which is about how the council works with its statutory partners, the NHS, the Fire Board. But responding to Councillor Alexander and Cassidy's comments, it was just to clarify that if people are discussing the spaces for people funding, that was 10 and then 30 million pounds of repurposed money from Transport Scotland. So it's not new money. It's money that Transport Scotland already held. And local authorities can make a bid to Sustrans to apply for funding, which has very strict conditions to it. And one of the strict conditions includes no capital works. This is about temporary measures that are put in place across the country to make social distancing easier when people are actively in travel. So in that respect, I really welcome some of the suggestions that have come forward, and I think they'll feed in very well into our active travel plan. But it's really important that all of us recognise that there is a particular funding that is available for certain projects, and if the ideas coming forward don't match that funding, there is no point in the council putting them forward because they're just not going to get approved. However, it's capturing that goodwill and all the suggestions and using other means to work with communities to see them realised. And I think using the active travel strategy is an excellent way to make that happen going forward. Thank you, Provost.
So we can consider things like cycle priority routes. Councillor Alexander, can you come back in again? Your hand's up. And you're muted. No, you're happy. Everyone's happy? Okay, item 8.3, do I take it that is adopted by the council? Thank you all very much. Item 8.4, the service plans. These again were constituted in better times, but they're part of our statutory obligation. Are there any comments on them as they stand? Are we all content with the service plans for the time being? Do I take it then that these are adopted by the council? We move on to the items under Standing Order 19.2, item 8.5. As Provost, I think I'm going to want to vote on this because some of the issues here should be actively approved by the council for legal reasons. But can I ask for contributions from the floor on any of the items at 8.5? If there are none, can I ask Verona if I'm free to not have a vote, even though this is a 19.2 item? Or Alan Turpey?
Rob says that report is just for noting.
Right, so we don't have to approve it. Okay, we're getting there.
Sorry if I can cut in. Yeah, in terms of 19.2, standard 19.2, I think it's important to clarify this. These decisions have been made. They are simply being reported to the council to make sure the councillors are aware of what has happened.
We don't have to validate even the ones with quasi-judicial content.
Nope.
Thank you for that guidance. Much appreciated. I take it, therefore, they are noted, and we can move on to item 8.6, the Audit Committee resignation. This is noted by the council. We're able to take nominations for a successor. Kath Johnston.
Yes, now that Councillor Kenneth Baird has resigned from the Audit Committee, we would like to nominate Colin Cassidy. We think he'd be the best person going forward for this position.
And do I see a seconder? Councillor Alexander, you're on mute.
Yes, I second this. I think he would make an excellent candidate.
Are there any other candidates? There being no further candidates, can I congratulate Councillor Cassidy? We now move on to item 8.7 on page 179, financial monitoring. I propose therefore Gary Fairley to talk to this, and then we can have a further discussion as councillors. Gary?
Yeah, good morning, Provost, morning members. The report sets out performance against budget for the year and shows a net underspend of just over £100,000, or 0.5% of the revised budget. There are material movements from that reported to Council in February, which relate to the Hopefield Resource Centre, which is subject to a private paper today, Lothian Buses dividend, which was rescinded as a consequence of COVID, and costs relating to the maintenance of public buildings. At the year end, the Council had a general reserve of £13.4 million, 9.4 of which was earmarked for use in the current financial year, leaving a general reserve of £4 million. Today, Provost, the Council is recommended to consider the 3 recommendations on the report, which all are for noting today. So happy to take any questions on the report, Provost.
Okay, all for noting. Do we have any comments? Councillor Milligan.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, I would just like to maybe highlight one that I've got real concerns about, and that's the overspend in the repairs and maintenance section, where the Cabinet and the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee and the Council in Q1, Q2 and Q3 were told that these budgets were fine. And then we get to Q4 and the final outturn, and suddenly there's a £406,000 overspend. How is that absolutely possible? I see what we're saying here, that late tickets and all that, but we continue to be assured in Audit Committee and at Council that the structures are in that stuff like this can't happen. So how can you go through the full year with elected members being dealt a budget's on track, and then when you actually get the final outturn, it's no a kick in the backside away for £500,000 overspent? We need to be making sure that the work your auditors are doing and the finance department's doing is that there's a complete control on this. In other areas where we have overspends, at least there's indications all the way through that we're having problems, and you can ask for remedial work to happen. And if we get 3 or 4 of our areas come in with budgets like this, then it's just not acceptable. So I would really like to understand what's happened here.
Okay, Gary, some gap analysis required.
Thanks, Provost. And just coming back, I'm happy to provide a more detailed briefing note on the analysis of the position that's gone through the year. In terms of the outturn position, the £406,000 that's reported is an overspend on repairs and maintenance across the range of council buildings of £173,000. An overspend on the building maintenance service, and that's effectively an internal trading account of £263,000 with a small underspend on the client budget. Within those variations, there are a number of issues that lead to that, which have made forecasting of the position on those service areas extremely challenging during the year. I take the council leader's point about the being able to give an indication that there is a variance or there are difficulties in reporting the performance of those areas, and we'll certainly pick that up in the current financial year. But happy to provide separately a briefing note that gives a bit more detail on the issues that lie behind the position that we report today.
We're due to have an audit committee shortly. Would the paper be on this variance be prepared in time for that, or for some other forum?
It would be challenging to bring it to audit committee. Indeed, I think the papers for that are going out today, Provost, but certainly happy to bring it to the whatever forum people feel is appropriate.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I completely agree with Councillor Milligan's view on this. It's unacceptable that we are told one thing and then £500,000 later we're looking at unforeseen repairs. Surely a council of our size should be, or an organisation of our size, should be able to keep tabs on these things. There's things called quantity surveyors who can look at these jobs and say, this is our forecast for the year. And even unforeseeable things are taken into that. You know, there's a variance. So I'd like to see this report from Gary sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and an explanation of what an internal trading account is. That sounds an interesting concept. Councillor Hardy and then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Provost. I know obviously with the situation with the Lothian bus dividend in the meantime, but given the ongoing situation with the virus, what is the risk of an impact to the future profitability of Lothian bus and the risk that in future years we will see perhaps no dividend or a greatly reduced dividend? And also, given that perhaps we might be looking at just 25% usage of the bus compared to before the virus, is there a risk that the council maybe have to step in to perhaps bail out some of the pension fund that we unfortunately seem to have got ourselves into a position where we're guaranteeing, or indeed perhaps may have to provide money to ensure the long-term stability of the bus company? Is this a risk that we have taken account of, and what is the potential impact to the council in the long term?
Gary, I wonder if you could comment insofar as we're not touchy on commercial and confidence stuff.
Yeah, so just for members' benefit, we have a 5.5% shareholding in Lothian Buses, which we inherited at local government reorganisation in 1996. We have enjoyed dividends since then. Clearly, we would also expect there to be an impact on planned dividends that Lothian Buses had, and members will be aware that the strategy for the extension of Edinburgh Trams relied on an element of dividends flown to Edinburgh Council in terms of the Lothian Buses company. I'm aware that the council leader has recently written to the chief executive of Lothian Buses to engage with them around support, and I suppose that's both in terms of the financial position of that company, but also recognising that they're a critical public service provider within the community. We will monitor carefully in conjunction with colleagues in Edinburgh and Lothian Buses the financial position of the company and any impact that might have on the council. In terms of the pension fund position, the council was already obliged to support the company as a shareholder when there was a separate Lothian Buses pension fund. The amalgamation of the pension funds last year didn't change the risk. That risk was always inherent within the arrangements.
Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Provost. I've got a few issues with a lot of the financial monitoring because it may well be that the bottom line is we have a wee surplus, but going through it's all peaks and troughs for some things. And one thing I always ask about is the homeless savings targets are not met again. At the last meeting, I was given assurance that these projects would be brought forward, for example, Jarnac, and what's happened there. As a result of this, our bed and breakfast costs are accruing, and the service we're providing vulnerable people is not good enough. It's not just a cost to the housing budget, and it's a cost to the social works budget, because these people are racking up issues by living in bed and breakfasts. There's the other one, the advertising on the vehicles that has slipped for a whole year. Surely not. Surely somebody's been keeping an eye on that throughout the year. In the capital, on HRA, no, I'm away in front of me. That's enough. Thank you.
Okay, Gary, any response on that?
So the report in front of you today sets out the factual position. So it sets out where we were during the financial year in respect of the homeless budget. And you're right that we expected the project within Jarnac Court to have a positive impact on spend in that area. Clearly that project was delayed, and there was a report to council to agree that the scope of that project late last year. That project clearly is also further delayed because of COVID. And I'm sure Kevin can give councillors an update in terms of where we are in terms of the homeless spend and the position in the current financial year. And you're right, there are a number of issues within the report which highlights a number of variances across services. I'm happy to take any questions from members in terms of the detail of those, as I'm sure our colleagues.
Kevin, do you want to come in on the Jarnac project and the problem of bed and breakfast generally?
Yeah, certainly, Provost. So just to confirm, clearly the position as Councillor Johnson's outlined it, we anticipated Jarnac Court would become available to us through the course of the year after the report that Gary's referenced had come to Council. Clearly, with the COVID scenario, that has disrupted. We have in fact recommenced internal works. Those were permitted from the easement of lockdown last week. So those are now in hand. There's external works to happen. We anticipate that might be eased from the lockdown review this week. So we're able to move on Jarnac Court again and get that work completed. In addition to that, we have the conversion of Lonehead Police Station, also assigned in the capital plan. And both of those, in conjunction with the allocation policy review, which gave a greater percentage to homeless households, again in a report, I think it was around about November to Council, will allow us to address those extra demands that are being made in respect of bed and breakfast. Indeed, during lockdown, the only allocations that are being made are to homeless households of all void properties that have become available in that time. Councillor Johnson, I know, will be aware that from the 1st of October, the unsuitable accommodation order comes into effect, so that all homeless households, regardless of whether they have in the past been pregnant or families, are not expected to exceed 7 days within bed and breakfast. So we are anticipating that, in addition to buybacks that we have been carrying out through lockdown and can now get settled following phase 1, are again going to bring on additional accommodation to us. So we should be able to meet those demands in relation to the homeless budget. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no hands showing, this is a report for noting. 8.7 is thereby noted. 8.8, housing revenue account, page 210, also for noting. No hands showing. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
That's fine. Thank you very much. I just want to say that there always seems to be slippage in the capital spend. Also, the rent, I don't think the rent collection is good enough. I mean, we're writing off £100,000, and that's almost the cost of buying a new property for someone who's desperate for housing to live in. Is there something we can do to improve our rent collection and make sure we're not writing off enormous sums of money? And again, on Appendix C, I see we're still not doing any mortgage to rent. I would have thought, especially during this period, there would have been at least inquiries about that. And at the last time I made inquiries, I asked if this money was not spent on mortgage to rent, could it be spent on some other aspect of homeless service?
Gary, possibly Kevin as well.
Thanks, Provost. If I can pick up on the mortgage to rent, first of all, that reflects the government scheme. So the expenditure on that is really driven by applications through that scheme, and unfortunately, because these funds flow from government, we can't then defer it or utilise it elsewhere in terms of addressing capital investment within the housing revenue account. The figure in terms of the other issue in terms of voids and irrecoverables, it is a consequence of the housing revenue account that we do each year have and a requirement to write off former tenancy arrears or other debts where it's quite clear that the tenant is unable to pay that. And I suppose the context, the overspend is £97,000, but I suppose I would put that in the context of the overall rent income on the account, which is some £31 million. But again, happy to pick up separately or a further report in terms of the position on rent collection and voids and irrecoverables.
Gary, the trend presumably is quite difficult in rent collection in this COVID period. Have we any signs that you can share with us as to how deep our collection problem is going to be going forward?
It's still very early days in terms of trying to identify what the longer term impact for rent collection will be from COVID. We certainly seen a drop off in rent collection in April and May. Some of that may be offset as benefit payments then start to flow through the system. But I think, like all of our income streams, council tax included, it will take some time until we really see the financial consequences and are able to give a realistic projection of what the outturn will be in terms of rent collection, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Obviously, we were able to counsel those who get into financial difficulties, and that's going to be a busy place. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. Just to pick up on that, I have asked Ken Pike for a trend analysis on rent collections from last year through this COVID-19 period. I did receive some information recently that there has been, as Gary alluded to, a drop-off in rent collections. I think it's been over a 0.5% increase in non-payment, but I'm happy to share that when that comes forward. I'll share that with elected members.
Thank you. This being a paper for noting, we move on to 8.9. General Services Capital Plan. Are there any questions? Councillor Curran, your hand's still up. The capital plan is noted. 8.10, financial update. Gary, can you talk to this, please?
Thanks, Provost. So this report provides an outline of the initial estimate of the financial impact for the council, really focus on the period to the end of the month of June. You should note that as outlined in the report, that the position changes and the merging every day as the impact and consequences of the pandemic are evolve. And indeed, Fiona Robertson touched on earlier the position in respect of education. So what we're seeing is a significant impact in the short term, reflecting both the interventions by government, but also in terms of the council to support the economy, business, health, and the continuation of local government services. The position in the report highlights our best assessment of probably the cost over this initial lockdown period. What I would say is that those figures exclude any cost in relation to the Midlothian Integration Joint Board. Those are collected separately and have been included in the IJB mobilisation plans. Thus far, the Health Directorate of Scottish Government have allocated £50 million towards the local government element of those mobilisation plans, but I believe that those exceed £1 billion in terms of cost, with Barnett consequentials of around 620 million. So there's a potential funding gap there. At the time of reporting, we have identified the direct costs of around £3.9 million, with further financial impact assessed based on some key assumptions around council tax collection and slippage in savings plans. And members will recollect that there were significant savings in terms of the budget to achieve a balanced budget, and the officers involved in those have been working on other issues related to the pandemic, and therefore there is slippage. So at this point in time, we estimated that just in the period to June, plus council tax and slippage, we're looking at circa £9.2 million of a financial impact. The report also highlights the Scottish Government investment in terms of addressing COVID, and I think the Scottish Government's budget bill highlighted investment of £4 billion. The report sets out the funding to local government, and of which to date Midlothians received £3.9 million. The report also highlights wider issues around HRA and the capital plan that are emerging, and then the report also sets out of all the recommendations, one for council to agree, which is the action that needs to be taken over the remainder of the financial year to continue to monitor the position, but also in terms of the response that the council needs to consider to the pandemic. So that's a very quick run through, Provost. Again, happy to take any questions.
Okay, so far we've been supported by the Scottish Government such that our reserves are still 4 million-ish, but the outlook is pretty imponderable. Do we know where the 155 million from the Scottish Government has got to? Has that been apportioned yet, and is that included in these figures, or is it going to be in a different accounting period?
So first of all, just to correct the position in terms of reserves, the financial impact to the council, what we're looking at is already £9.2 million, of which we've had 3.9 million of government support. That includes a distribution of the 155 million Barnett consequentials, and therefore there is a significant gap emerging between the impact on the council and the funding support that it's had from Scottish Government, and that's what we need to address. And so that will inevitably erode our available reserves and require further interventions. Indeed, the COSLA spokesperson, the COSLA president, my mistake, can you just bear with me a moment, Provost? Sorry, it was Councillor Stephen McCabe, COSLA's young person spokesperson, and Councillor McGregor, the resources spokesperson, highlighted just recently the net additional cost between March and June, once funding provided by Scottish Government was taken into account, shows a net additional cost to councils across Scotland of around about £145 million. I suppose to highlight that, while council plans are at an advanced stage to look at the restart and through the route map, there's little doubt that there are many practical challenges and many significant financial challenge going forward in terms of further costs that will be incurred over the remainder of the financial year as we seek to try and reintroduce services, have children return to school, and deal with the consequences over the longer term.
So the long and short of it is that the 4 million reserves could easily be wiped out in a few months unless further support comes from Westminster through Barnett, through the Scottish Government.
So without even looking at the costs of that will incur over the remainder of the year, if there was no further intervention, then yes, the reserves would be fully utilised.
Thank you. Any further questions? Jim Muirhead.
Sorry, Provost, I was trying to wait to the end of this item just to point an issue. The previous paper on the General Services Capital Plan you asked the council simply to note, but there's actually a second recommendation there to endorse additions to the General Services Capital Plan. It's just to keep things right. I don't suppose anybody's got a problem with it, but it was just to highlight the fact that we should just note that, or
yes,
not note that, but actually endorse it.
It is set out that there was a requirement to endorse the additions to the General Services Capital Plan. It's all clearly set out. We've all had it. I'm not minded to have a roll call unless anyone's really keen, and I don't think there's a problem there legally. Alan Turkey, you can intervene on that if you think differently, but thank you for pointing that out. We are all aware we've endorsed additions to the plan. Thank you all. Shall we, Jim, thank you for that. Can we therefore move to the financial update again and ask if there are any comments or questions? We therefore note 8.10 and approve it.
Yeah.
Approve the recommendations. Something a little bit more cheerful, the Midlothian Allotment and Food Growing Strategy, 811 on page 251. Been a great period for those with allotments, and hopefully going to have more of them. Any comments on this? Jim Muirhead.
Provost, my mistake. I'll take my hand down.
That's 15 all, you and me. Okay, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I just think this is a really, really good idea. I fully support it, and I think that we should be more adventurous. I think there's lots of spaces that we could actually use to grow food, grow fruit trees, etc. And I think that going forward, with the huge possibility that there will be lots of people struggling to feed themselves, I think that this is such an important thing that we do. And I think that we should also be encouraging people with huge gardens, which many people do. I think that we should be encouraging them to grow vegetables and etc. Especially, I know that going around a lot of areas, I see that a lot of council house areas have huge gardens. And I think that we should maybe be opening up Vogrie again to grow food. And this in conjunction with the nurseries, because the nursery children are being encouraged. They've got all the proper equipment, etc. So they should maybe be part of this economic system, growing from seed, or showing us adults how we can grow food. So there's a huge resource over at Vogrie that could be utilised, and I think that we should take every opportunity to use every part of Midlothian to make it a verdant and fruitful place to be.
Thank you very much. Keeping with our traditions there, we have also John Hackett and then Councillor Johnson.
Sorry for my distraction, because like many folk during lockdown, I've taken up gardening, and I was just looking over to find a squirrel eating whatever it is I'm growing in my little patch of ground there. So that's the first time I've ever saw that, so my apologies. I'd just like to thank the service for putting the strategy together, in particular the author of the report, James Kinch. The strategy itself reads really well, looks great, and I know has involved the local community. This strategy will allow the community to get involved with identifying sites and taking on community growing spaces. So I welcome the report and I fully endorse it. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnson? Councillor Johnson, who is muted, is now unmuted. Hello.
Thank you very much. This is maybe a bit of a long shot, but I thought it might be a good idea if we had a gardening page on the council's website, and that could be updated by the landscape services to say things like the jobs in your garden for the week could be mowing the grass, weeding, lifting your tax, or whatever, just, you know, like the Beach Grove Garden and all these gardening programs, but it would be specific to our climate, if you like, in Midlothian, and that could help to work in partnerships with lots of growing gardens in Midlothian.
I'm sure James Kinch would be happy to talk about the possibilities there. And further contributions, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to make sure that we note this absolutely firmly, and it doesn't slip like other things we pay lip service to, like active travel and stuff. We need to really do something to ensure that the people in Midlothian engage with us on this project, because this is going to be crucial for future generations, that we use ground that's already sitting there. We're paying money to cut grass on. We could be ploughing it up and getting communities involved in growing vegetables. So I really do want to follow through with this one.
Thanks very much, Councillor Cassidy. I see hands up for Councillor Johnson, Councillor Alexander and Councillor Hackett. Councillor Hackett's, Councillor Cassidy, last man in, all the hands are down, and in a course of time we therefore adopt this and recognise it and move on to H12, the school session dates for the academic year. Are there any comments?
Provost?
There being none?
No.
Yep. Councillor Muirhead?
Yeah, can I just thank staff for putting this together? Obviously, we go through quite a process of consultation in the course of the approach to preparing the school session dates, and we've actually done all that consultation. As a result of instructions from Scottish Government to change the situation with regards to the COVID emergency and getting the schools back, we've had to change that. But I'd just like to thank the teachers and the staff and sessional staff as well for the cooperation in agreeing this, and hope that people understand that we're having to react to the situation now as opposed to having gone through all the consultation that we normally do in these circumstances. And I would also note that we've managed to again align it as much as we can. It's important we align it as much as we can with our neighbouring authorities to ensure that we've got teachers who work here that live in other authority areas, and it helps to smooth that whole process out. So thanks to everybody that's contributed to that.
Thank you. We further contributions? Can I therefore conclude the public?
Provost, sorry, I've had my hand up for a while.
Kelly, I apologise. I just noticed it. Thank you. Yes.
That's all right.
Councillor Parry.
Yeah, I agree with Jim there. I think people have put in a power of work. Thank you, Isla. But I did want to ask, because it's the last public point on the agenda that I can ask it, is when are parents going to get some more details about what the session times mean for them in terms of when are they going to know what days their kids are going to school and what weeks they're going to school? I know there's a lot to put into that, and I think the work that's been done is absolutely phenomenal. But I think what parents just really want to know is, when are they going to know? Because they need to speak to their employers to see how they can work flexibly around it. So I'm just hopeful that we've at least got some sort of timeline that we can reassure people and let them know around this.
Thank you. Response on that? I don't know if Fiona, you were able to come in at this stage.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Councillor Parry, we have a session with chairs of parent councils this week, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, to share the plans moving forward. And we anticipate that parents will receive information on next session by next Wednesday.
Now, it's obviously very helpful if parents know the childcare arrangements and that they can get involved in the labour market sooner rather than later. There we are. Also, Councillor Wallace.
Yes, Provost. This is the thank you. This is the third to follow paper. I had to get paper copies of the agenda, but unfortunately, no to follow papers came through to me. In future, as long as we're having to work in the present circumstances, can we now make it standard that to follow papers get forwarded to members that have to get paper copies? Thank you.
Verona, are you able to take that on board? Verona MacDonald? Councillor Muirhead?
Sorry, Provost. All papers were distributed with the agenda. The draft agenda went out with to follow papers, but the finalised agenda had all reports attached to it.
Sorry, Provost.
That doesn't seem to be Joe's experience. We've got a gap
I
here.
don't have any to follow papers in my agenda.
So there were two stages. We issued a number of reports early days, and some papers have dropped out of that to go to the audit committee, and there have been some additional papers. And what you're saying, Joe, is you didn't get those additional papers, of which the school session date was one. Is that correct?
Yep. Critical childcare and the General Services Capital Plan. I
Also the capital plan.
No other two follow papers.
Yeah. Are you content for us to look into this with a view to making sure in future meetings that even those who are not electronic and are wanting paper receive all the documents? That would seem to be the way forward.
Yes, it would. Thank you.
Okay. Verona, you're happy with that? No reason we can't do it?
Yeah, they were issued on Friday to all elected members.
Yeah, but only electronically, I think, is the point. Anyhow, I suggest we take this up offline and make sure the next meeting doesn't have this sort of a glitch. Councillor Muirhead?
Yes, Provost, thanks. I accept the points that Councillor Parry's making about the concerns that are being raised by parents. I've had some as well in regards to when, what's the plan, guys? And I think we have to, though, record the fact that how difficult this has been to try to determine what the shape of our education going forward is going to be. And one of the major things that could potentially affect it, and this is where the difficulties are, we're sitting here this side of the summer holidays trying to determine what education is going to look like at the other end when we come back earlier than we would normally be coming back on the 11th of August, without having all the facts that are going to be potentially or circumstances that are going to exist at that time. Social distancing is currently 2 metres. There is a possibility that part of the way during July that could change. That could actually change to something less or nothing at all, in which case the shape of education beyond that point could change. So I think, officers have tried to work to try to cover any eventual scenario that exists there. So I'm no surprised that we're in a situation where, people are maybe saying, why are we not getting told? But the reality is it's a difficult situation that everybody's been in. And I think people are doing their best to try to get the shape of that thing sorted out so that we can go forward as soon as we can to inform people. And it's good that Fiona is meeting with the chairs of the parent council, and obviously we'll get information back out to people after that, parents as quick as we can after that.
Could I ask Councillor Cassidy to contribute?
Why?
Because your hand's up.
Oh, no, I'll take it down.
Thank you. Councillor Hackett, your hand's up. And you're on mute.
Provost. Could I just ask Fiona if it was possible just to very quickly talk us through some of the time frame here? Because again, I accept Councillor Parry's point. I've got those concerns. My kids are meant to be starting back on the 11th as well, and my partner and I are trying to work out what we'd be doing for childcare after that. But in terms of the time frame, and I'm interested to hear from Fiona, if possible, when directives are being issued by the Scottish Government and the sort of time frames that the Council has to draw up plans and then report them back, and then the sign-off process on that. And again, because I just want to sort of talk through the process for this, because I think parents would find it quite helpful as well to know some of the background here. Thank you.
Okay. Do we want feedback at this point?
Yep, Councillor Hackett, thank you for the question. At this point in time, every single school has been working on, first of all, the risk assessments and the capacity of their schools. And we were not able to communicate with parents until we'd undertaken all of those tasks, because it's critical that we can actually consider how many children we can get into the building safely. We've also undertaken the audit of how many staff will be available to us in August as well. So again, bearing in mind that those that are shielding have been asked to shield until the 18th of July, and then we'll receive a further update. So all of the planning has to take in quite a number of factors. So the capacity of the building, making sure all the risk assessments and the hygiene is in place, the signage is in place, ensuring that we have the staff available to teach, and then to explore the impact of transportation. So that probably gives you an idea of the scale of what we've been working on to date. In terms of the directions from the Scottish Government, the legal basis on which we can reopen schools, we're anticipating an update on the 1st of July, which is clearly after the end of this academic session. And based on that update, again, we'll reflect on any amendment to our plans. We have to submit our local delivery plan to Education Scotland by next Wednesday. Again, we will receive feedback on our local delivery plan, so that again might mean that we've got some amendments to make, albeit I can confirm that we have reflected on all of the guidance from the Scottish Government and that provided via COSLA and ADES to implement our plan. So you can see at this point in time, as we move towards the end of this academic session, there are two key dates. One is next Wednesday, when we submit to Education Scotland and we receive feedback, and also the 1st of July, when we receive the next education direction. And then just to be clear, that education direction is only in place for 21 days, and then will be issued with another education direction. So this will continue throughout the summer period. Clearly, the education directions are based on the public health advice at that point in time. So again, we are currently operating on the basis of the 2 metres for physical distancing in our schools and on transport. If a change occurs over that summer period, we will then move to plans that we have in place for the 1 metre. So again, that was why it was critical that we retain the 2 in-service days at the start of the next academic session, because we will clearly have to amend all of our plans at the start of that session if there have been major changes over the summer period.
Thank you, Fiona, very much for that. I see Councillor Wallace.
Yes, thanks, Provost. Fiona said there that people under shielding of the 18th of July is their date. The last letter I got, because I'm under shielding, is the end of July. On the 18th of July, I can walk out, I can have a walk outside my house, but I have not had a letter telling me that I'm now liberated, so to speak. That's from the 18th of July. Is there another letter come out? I don't know.
Just to confirm, apologies if I misled you there, we're anticipating an update for that date of the 18th of July, and therefore then taking into consideration those members of staff who are currently shielding, and then what that means for our staff. And clearly it's so that we can obviously ensure their well-being and their safety if they are returning to school.
Thank you. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, Provost. I'd just like to return to the point that Kelly Barry's making, and because it is critical that people know what schooling is going to be and what days are going to be. And I've got to say, I didn't envy education, whether it's in government or at council level, their task, because I just didn't think applying a 2 metre of social distancing to children can actually work. I just physically don't think it works. If you tell teenagers how to go down the road and turn left, they'll all go down the road and turn right. How do you tell a 6-year-old bear not to go and play with another 6-year-old bear? I think it's an almost impossible task. But the reality here is that I suppose in some way, certainly in the high schools, Midlothian's in a more fortunate position because the spaces it needs is likely to be able to be used, but at a massive cost to community facilities, because you've got Newbattle, Lasswade and the Dalkeith campus that have all these community facilities. If you look, for example, in Edinburgh, at the problem they're having with the high schools there, Ken, how does Edinburgh Council, who had their plan knocked back yesterday, how do they manage to cope with that? They've not got these facilities attached to their high schools. So how do some of their bigger high schools actually get 50% of the pupils in per week? It's a ginormous task. And I think the reality here is by the time we get to the end of July, I think the point Jim was making, this is likely all to have changed. Because I think there needs to be some sort of reality here. Again, we talked earlier on about like the bus services running at 25% capacity. If you're going to nationalise them, that's what you can do. If you're not going to nationalise them, there's no company in the world can run a bus service and make even break even on that. So I think there needs to be a really grown-up conversation through the Helior communities as to what is safe, what's acceptable to get back to a bit of normality. But I didn't envy the task of Fiona Robertson and her team, keeping in mind we're just going to get to the end of this month and all these staff should be going away on a well-deserved holiday. I think by the time we hit August, this will all have changed, and hopefully it'll have changed for the better.
Yep, it's beyond our pay grade to work out whether 1.5 or 2 metres is the future. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. It was just coming back following Fiona's contribution and acknowledging what Derek's saying there. I think it's only right that the council publish the plans that's had agreed and approved by the Scottish Government, recognising that they could change over the summer period. I have had parents highlight to me other local authorities that have published information about what they're planning to do. But as we've seen with Edinburgh's plan being knocked back and the Scottish Government having final approval of these plans, I would maybe suggest that it's premature, and possibly quite a number of families have planned on the basis of what was previously published. So I recognise the desire to have that information out quickly. I'm wanting that too as a parent, but I'd rather have the right information or the most up-to-date information being published for parents so they can plan on a proper basis. Thank you.
Okay, I think there's quite a consensus there on the way forward. Are we happy to adopt 8.12? Request to agree the school session and agree the school session dates.
Provost, can I ask one question, please?
Councillor Curran, sorry.
Thanks. A question for Fiona. Just obviously for the right reasons, the school return date has been brought forward about 8 days, I think. Thinking about the many families who have got holidays booked, whether they go on these holidays or not is another question, but is there any consideration given, or will there be consideration given to how these absences may be recorded? For example, if a family had planned a holiday from the 8th to the 15th.
I can confirm that we've been seeking national guidance on this matter, because I agree that the term date did change. So there's the possibility that families are on holiday. We're seeking confirmation at national level, not just for that week, but ongoing throughout that term, given that we've got a blended learning model. So how are we recording, in school and out of school? And so again, we're looking for that national agreement so that we can use the appropriate codes on CMIS, which is our management information system.
Thank you. That's a practical issue, and I think also for teachers who are booked on holidays, and some flexibility is in the system for them, so it should be for parents too, I guess. We are therefore happy, I think, to adopt 8.12 and therefore move on, it being just
I think Diane Alexander wants to speak.
Thank you, Diane. I missed your hand. Diane, you're muted, I think.
Yes, it was just a bit on what you were pointing out as well, that it should be, the flexibility should be for teachers as well, because I think that some teachers will also have plans for that date, that the early come back date.
So I believe that's been agreed. Fiona, would you like to comment on how teachers are impacted by the change?
It's actually all staff that are impacted by the change, and it's a case-by-case basis depending on their circumstances.
Yeah, okay. Content. And we pass on to the private papers. We're at 12:30, so we'll be going for 25 to 30 minutes and then a break at that point, unless anyone's desperate now. So the papers.
Sorry, Provost, there's 18.8.13, the transport appraisal.
Not in my paper. So this is the Sestran paper. Is that right?
Yes, to be presented if required by Ian Johnson, Head of Major Projects.
Is Ian online? I do apologise. No, 8813 is here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Transport Transition Plan Engagement on page 303. You can tell that I'm missing Dorothy's excellent markup of the physical papers. Does anyone have anything to say in this space? Obviously, transport is going to be another difficult area for the next 6 months, if not longer. Councillor Milligan.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, the paper's self-explanatory, and it's about making or getting the government, along with the local councils, and you can see the array of councils we're talking about there, to make sure that as we come out of this, there is a connectivity across cities and that where it's necessary. But again, I'm going to make the point that I'm not sure if we're going to go into a 25% limit on bus companies. In fact, I think even if you go up to a 50% limit on any public transport, I can't see us having public transport companies left unless we absolutely nationalise them. And even at that, the cost of doing that would be absolutely ginormous. I think we need to think how we're going to get people about, because Midlothian absolutely is wholly dependent on Lothian buses to be able to move people back and forward to work, and especially the people on low incomes. Lothian buses, as Andrew Hardy mentioned earlier, will councils have to step in, not just to top up the pension fund, but will the councils have to step in to save the bus company? Because at this moment in time, the bus company is exceptionally vulnerable. They're actually saying quite candidly and clearly that they're vulnerable, and I think that's the same as all the other bus companies through Great Britain. I should imagine, if we're talking about filling them with no more than 25%. I mean, under social distancing, the brand new 100 people Lothian buses at a maximum would be running about with 25 people on them. But actually, when you look at trying to social distancing to 2 metre standards, you're actually talking 15 people on them.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. So there needs to be an awful lot of work done with the companies. And as I say, there just needs to be that conversation. What is safe today, or what other mitigating measures can we make, like face coverings, etc., when we go into public transport?
Yeah, I mean, the issue for me is the comparison with Germany, where public transport is pretty much back to normal, but with face coverings, and that they don't appear to have second spike. But again, that's for government to decide. But I'm with you on the general sentiments. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. Just quickly, yes, thank you. Just as a councillor for a rural area, I'll just highlight the importance, we all know it, of public transport to rural communities, and the importance of getting the situation resolved as quickly as possible. And I know residents from Tynewater are contacting me, struggling to get out and about with the public transport not up and running. So it's crucial we get this right and done quickly. Thank you.
Okay, don't get me started on the 5152 bus. Councillor Alexander. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I think there's several issues round about this. One, we need to make it much easier for people to go out and about with their bicycles. At the moment, there aren't really places where you can go and leave your bike. If you do go out, if you go into Dalkeith, for instance, there's nowhere really to go and park your bike safely, especially if, as you do, as I do, go out with, I have a dog buggy, and it would be the same if people had a children buggy. You don't want to be leaving that where it's not seen and where it needs to be safe. You need to be able to leave your stuff safe. I think also we need to make roads safer for people travelling with bikes. And I just wonder, with buses being 25% available for people if you're going to have social distancing, etc. I just wonder if we should, and I think this is more a government issue, is creating what we would call transport bubbles, so that people who maybe travel from the Rosewell or Bonnyrigg into Edinburgh each day for work, they could create their own travel bubble where perhaps 4 or 5 of them could travel in the one car. And it would be much the same as we're hoping to do with perhaps nurseries, where people have their own, where the children have their own bubble, where they just socialize within that bubble. So I just wonder if those ideas could be put forward.
It sounds very much like the bus on the local review board, which I don't think we're going to see for a while. But yeah, of course, the bubble concept is moving down south, and there's going to have to be fresh ideas up here for it to get back to anything like normal. This is for noting. Are there further comments? Then that is 8.13 finished with, and we move on to 9.1, which is in the private section. The protocol